Greetings and good afternoon, and welcome to Missions Monday, albeit a little bit late, some technical difficulties. My apologies for that. But as always, we're talking all things missions, and from time to time on the program, we discuss missions origin stories. And today we begin our new year. Happy New Year, by the way. We begin our new year talking about the origin story of the moons in Mexico. And I love their story as it's lengthy, it's full, it's fruitful, it's encouraging, it's inspiring, and we'll talk a little bit about that today on Missions Monday. So I guess a great place to begin is the beginning. So, Pastor Bruce, how did it all begin with you?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you, Pastor Renaldo. And we're currently in cold New England visiting.
Okay.
We're not in Mexico, so finishing up our Christmas vacay. But yeah, for me, I'm from Houston, Texas. I was from the 60s and 70s, right? And went through all of that. Raised Catholic, 12 years of Catholic school. Became an atheist towards the beginning of my high school, reading a lot of philosophy, reading a lot of science and stuff like that, which I liked, and became an atheist. I was pretty much the black sheep in the Jesuit school, and then 60s and 70s take over the culture. I was pretty much into all of that, the hippiness, the selling drugs and all that during college. And But God reached me when I was 23. I read the Bible for the first time. The Jesus movement was kind of tail end of that. This is around in the late 70s, but 77, 78, I read the Bible. I fell in love with Jesus, actually. I became a real Jesus freak, which an unsaved believer, loving Jesus, but being, a hippie and living that lifestyle. And a year into that, I was reaching a crisis in my life with drinking and my life getting out of control, and I had an encounter with Jesus Christ, like a very typical during the Jesus Revolution, and gave my life to Christ. I said, if you want this garbage of a life, you can have it, and I'll do anything you say from here on. I'm done. And I really meant business, and he challenged me. God challenged me. Like every day I'd come home from work, and he'd say, okay, I want you to get rid of your beer bottles. I want you to get rid of all these books on esotericism. I want you to get rid of all your rock collection and all that. And I did everything he said. But one thing I said to God, I said, I don't want to go to church. But I still hated religion. And but I said, I'll do it. I'll do it if you tell me. But you have to tell me. And so he told what's that?
What year was that?
This was 78.
Okay.
And so he put in my heart to go witness to friends of mine. And one of the first places I went was the Adirondacks to a hippie commune. And a friend of mine there, and I drove them crazy. And then I moved to Boston, and a friend of mine there was managing a punk rock band. And I met the ministry on the Boston Commons, soul winning. And that was basically it for me. I just knew from then on that it was the Bible Speaks back then, Greater Grace. And that was my ministry. And went full forward. Within a year, I was in Bible school.
Wow.
And met my wife. Tell your story.
Yeah. Well, I won't be so lengthy because not that big of a story. It's more, I grew up as a Catholic girl, believed in religion, that I could be saved by just being a good person and trying my best. And one day someone came to me and told me, testified of how that Jesus died for our sins and that we are saved through grace. And I couldn't believe it. I just thought, this is too good to be true. So they told me, well, if you don't believe it, just ask him. Ask your God and see if he will answer you. He'll answer you in a personal way. So a couple of months went by, and it was my birthday, actually. Someone gave me, another person gave me a book, and it was The Jesus Generation by Billy Graham. And I read it. And it was amazing because God just met me and through the Holy Spirit, individually, just personally. And it was just a revelation of his love for us and could see Jesus on the cross and that he died for me. And it was the best news I could have ever heard. And I just remember how the Holy Spirit filled my heart and just gave me a release of guilt and shame, just a real cleansing of the Holy Spirit. And it, took a while after that, a few years after that, where I understood how to follow Christ through the ministry. I met people in the ministry and became a disciple through the Word of God. So
beautiful. When was that when you got saved? Do you think when you got saved? When was that?
What do you mean?
What year?
Oh, it was 1972.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right.
1972.
He was just a little kid.
Yeah, but I really never. It took me a while to leave the world behind, and in my personal testimony is that it took the Lord. It took a lot of pain, emotional pain, and I finally just got to the point where I thought, God, why did you save me? And he came in, and that's when I met the ministry.
Wow.
Yeah. So
So you both were in the ministry, and then how did you two meet in the ministry?
Here in Boston, the church was just brand new starting. We were just starting in Christ, and there was a bunch of little Bible studies scattered about the city, and I was in one, mostly men, and then my pastor said, "Hey, why don't you come Thursday nights?" And so it was in Chelsea, and showed up at that Bible. It was all women, very, nice young women, and that's where we met. And we were just friends, a church brother and sister, and we more got together when I went to Bible school first, a couple of years before, and then she moved up there with her two sons, and that's when we got together.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. And then you both were in Bible school together?
basically, at the tail end, I was called, and he was finishing.
Oh, okay.
And interesting how God, he kept him there because he had lacked half a credit to graduate. So it was interesting how I just happened to arrive at that point, and he had a lot of free time. So yeah, Lord put us together. We knew each other probably 3 years before that. We knew each other for that many years.
So God kind of held you back a little bit, Pastor Bruce, because you left something behind. You forgot something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a big part of my education. My Bible is, getting engaged, and immediately having 2 kids, 2 sons, and taking care of them, and learning to walk by faith.
It must have been interesting to be a parent in Bible school right away. I mean, right after Bible school, being a parent right away for you.
Oh yeah. Again, it was a challenge of faith. That was the Jimmy Carter recession years still, and and it was a small town. Lenox was a small town. There wasn't many places to work. There wasn't many places to rent a house that we could fit a decent sized family in, and so that was the big challenge, is faith, to believe God for provision, which was part of our training for the mission field.
Mm. Now, how long were you guys together there in Lenox before God spoke about Mexico? And how did God speak about Mexico, for that matter?
Well, we have to blame Pastor Dan Licio for that, because but yeah, I was his good friend in Bible school. We were very tight, and he started, towards the end of Bible school with the vision for Mexico City. So we started a team. We had a good number of people, maybe 20 even at some times. And we started a project down in Agawam, Massachusetts. We actually started a church there. We did Bible, Sunday school ministry, bus ministry, and Bible study, and actually a church started from that. So we worked together as a team, and I was just on it more as his friend, and I spoke Spanish because I'm from Texas, but, never thinking I would go to Mexico. I just wanted to help my friend.
Of course.
So God kind of tricked me in there. And so eventually we went, started doing summer harvest there. We went on one, and then my wife went on one. My oldest son and I went to the first one, and then my wife went on one. And I never thought, we had 3 kids, newly married, we didn't have the finances. We were just barely making it, right? So not thinking I'm not going to go. I'm just a support team, right? And November 1986, God said, "You're going to Mexico." The team had kind of gone over 3 months, and they didn't have enough finances, and they all came back except for one couple that was just kind of hanging on by a thread. And God just spoke to us. It was just a rhema, total rhema. You're going to Mexico. And I knew enough then that, I mean, my entire, salvation and life up till then had been based on rhema, God speaking, and just obey. Don't question, just do it. And and I knew then, I said, oh boy, we're going to Mexico. And God had already spoken to her. You might want to share that.
Well, Robin, take me back. When you first went on a summer harvest, when they were first just going to visit, what did you think of Mexico?
What did I think of Mexico? I'm just trying to think. Well, it was interesting because to me, it felt like I just couldn't even place a landmark. Like if I was turned around the corner on the street, I'd be totally lost.
Wow.
Because the way that the houses are built and the neighborhoods are, it just, there's not, I don't know, it just was foreign land,
Yeah.
and it felt like that. I couldn't speak Spanish. When we arrived there, I didn't speak Spanish. So I think that played into it too, that I felt kind of lost there. So it was a big, immense, like flying over Mexico City, you cannot see anything else but concrete buildings there's no end to it. There's just no end to it. It's amazing, really, how big the city is and overwhelming. So that's what I thought when I first got there.
And then when did God speak to you?
God spoke to me beforehand. One time I was in a staff meeting with Pastor Stevens, and he was speaking on how you need to hear from the Lord personally. So I went home, put the kids in for a nap, and I got on my knees and I said, okay, well, I want what Pastor spoke about today, and would you please speak to me something personal? So he gave me 3 things. One of them was I'd longed for the European conference for probably 10 years. I wanted to go, and there was no way for me to go at this point. So he spoke to me and said, that I was going to go to the European conference. The next thing he said was, you're going to go to summer harvest, and you're going to be in the mission field within a year. And he didn't say Mexico, though. I think he knew if he said that, I probably wouldn't ask anymore. Wouldn't want to know anymore, because I really was I didn't really have a longing to go to Mexico,
Sure.
at that point. So that's how I heard from the Lord about it.
So when God spoke to me and I said to her, she was already prepped.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I knew
Were you surprised when, God gave you the rhema about mission field? Were you surprised that that's the word that came out of his mouth, Mexico?
Yes. And it was, and the first person that ever said it to me was Pastor Lightsey. He came to the house with Sandy one day. They had purchased a baby carriage for our son, John, that was born. And he said to me, don't you just want to go to Mexico? And I was like, no, it was not my plan. It really was not my plan.
And things were going really well for us. I mean, God had started to really provide for us as a family. We were just like really on top of the world with provisions, apartment, very close to the church. Our kids, everything was just like really starting to really take off. And then God says, you're going to Mexico.
Oh, so Robin, when he turned to you and said, Mexico, wow.
Yeah. I mean, in one sense, it was a shock to think of Mexico, but on the other hand, you're waiting upon God for him to show you. So it's kind of just, it made sense. Wow. And what confirmed, there were so many confirmations after that, there were a lot of confirmations. One of them is funny. The supermarkets in Pittsfield, the Price Chopper supermarket, they had an offer where if you spend $100 of groceries, there was a coupon that you could purchase an airline ticket anywhere in the continental United States, but also Mexico City. I'm not kidding. Not kidding.
Wow.
And that's how we got there. We purchased those tickets, one-way tickets with coupons, and it was just a great provision. So for $100 of groceries, that coupon gave us a flight.
Wow.
Yeah.
There were some other fleeces because like we had a hospital debt from our son.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm not going to leave. I can't go with the debt. And that was, God spoke to me in November, and in December we got a note from the hospital that they had an extra left over from lower income people for whatever charity, and they paid off our entire hospital. Yeah. And then we were also worried about a school for our kids, because we had 3 sons. One was Raymond was probably 13, 5, and then the young baby. But they called us from Mexico and said, hey, there's a Christian school and it's pretty close by. And that was it for us. We just knew God was just opening doors all over, and this was it. Mm-hmm. And so we did it pretty much without fear, but also without finances.
Wow.
We just did it.
Well, the first one we usually have, the second one we usually don't. We usually have the fear, we don't have the finances, but you didn't have either. What did the boys think? I mean, you got like older children now. They're going to Mexico.
Yes.
From Massachusetts to Mexico. That must have been a jump for them and an impact on the family.
Well, it was, especially for the oldest Ray, because he was prospering in the Christian school, baseball, sports, friends, and just he just had that ideal American life in small town Massachusetts, and just was really. And he had a little job and everything, and it was quite a faith adventure for him. Mm-hmm. I remember we had a stopover in Dallas on the way to Mexico, and we're just sitting there with all our luggage on the floor, and I'm looking at my kids and my family, and they're just looking like, "What have you got us into, Dad?"
Wow. And
I remember thinking a little bit of trepidation there, thinking, "Oh boy, God, you really help us, really." God really worked it out.
But boys usually look to their mom when they get in crisis. So, Robert, I'm sure the boys had had much more vocabulary for you than they had for their father.
Well, the good thing about the boys were they were very active, friendly kids, and the neighborhood children really in Mexico made a big difference. They didn't feel it so much. They just it just took a little while for them to get used to, the Spanish, but they learned it a lot quicker than I did. So yeah, it was helpful.
So then you guys got there, and you said there was one last couple that was there, and all the rest came home. So when you got there, you found the couple.
Right. They had a little apartment ready for us. And within about 2 months, we didn't know this at the time, but they were already thinking of going home because she was pregnant. He was struggling with the language and the other issues in their spiritual life. And they were actually, I actually feel like they didn't really want us to be there because they had planned to leave it before. But when we got there, they're thinking like, oh, God, I guess we got to stay a little longer just to kind of smooth it out for them. Like, wow. But after 2 months, they told us one Sunday we're leaving, and at that same time, the situation in Linux was going on.
Yeah.
And that blew up, and so we were just kind of there alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
That can be hard, especially with no team. Just as a family, you kind of like, but then again, there's 2 ways to see that. There can be like, oh, we're alone, or, oh, we have God in each other. And you kind of like circle the wagons with your faith a little bit and say, okay, we're in this as a family and we're in this. And is that kind of the way you guys saw it?
We were cemented in the call. We knew we should be there. So that, to me, I think that didn't really shake us too much. We knew we were supposed to be there, and so that was an anchor, really was.
I like that idea that you said of cemented. Like
yes.
You don't put another option on the table. There's no plan B. There's no like, well, if this doesn't work, we're going to do that. And if you see that as a family, not just as an individual, but as a marriage and as a family, when you resign yourself to that, then you don't entertain other options. Then the temptation to consider where I could go next or whatever doesn't cross your mind. That's a great
Right.
perspective to have when you hear the call of God, right?
Exactly.
Right, and the reason is once again is Rhema, Romans 10:17.
Yes.
Faith comes by hearing,
Mhm.
and hearing by the Rhema of God. So when God says something, you have the faith for it.
Yeah.
It comes with that, with the hearing Him speak. The faith comes with it. So you might look like a complete idiot to the rest of the world, and I'm sure we did. Even with Christian brothers, I mean, you're taking 3 kids to Mexico and you don't have any support, no finances. I go, yeah, we actually are. And I remember one story. We were putting our kids in the Christian school shortly after that, and it was a co-op school, different missionary groups, and of course, most of them are very well funded. So she was inside interviewing with the director, and I was outside interviewing with the head of the board, Baptist missionary. And he said, well, how's your deputation going? And I said, what's that word mean? He said, your itineration. I go, I'm sorry, I don't know that word either. What's that? And then he says, well, you're fundraising. Okay. Well, I was kind of fishing around for something to say to him because I didn't have any.
Yeah.
I said, well, there's a fireman in Boston in the church that promised $200 a month. And he says, that's good. What else do you got? And I said, that's it. And he got up in my face with his eyes bugging out. And he started thumping my chest like that. He says, you need to pack right now and go home. You can't live in this city on $200 a month.
Wow. And
I know what he was thinking. His idiot comes here with his kids and with no money. And the missionary family, the missionary community is going to have to support him with his, not just his tuition here in the school, but his food and rent.
Yeah.
And I could understand his perspective from that point of view, where you spend 5 years and visiting 100 churches and getting $100, $500 a month from each church and that whole bit. And we didn't have any support promised. Pastor Lightsey and Jim Williams, who had started a business in Baltimore, they started supporting us early on, and that was our only support at the time. But everything was so up in the air at the time, because everybody's moving to Baltimore. We didn't have anything, and so
did your kids? Did your kids get in school? Did they stay?
Yeah, we did. They did.
How did that happen?
I think.
What's the question?
How did the kids get into school with it?
That's. I think that they sponsored us a little bit the first year.
Yeah.
Wow.
A little bit. But we paid rent. We paid our tuition. We never had trouble. We had to take public transportation. Of course, they all had brand new big cars and all that.
Wow.
And we were a bit of the oddballs in the missionary community.
Right.
The kids would come and for their lunch, and they would open up with all this. Back then, Mexico didn't have the free trade agreement back then, if you remember NAFTA.
Yes.
And so anything in Mexico, there was nothing from the U.S., nothing. And these kids would open their lunch boxes and pull out Cheetos and Milky Ways and all this food from the U.S. And my kids would just look at it like,
yes. What is that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Dad, can we be Assemblies of God?
Can we change for just the lunch purposes only? Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. And then no team too. I mean, really the family became the team. And that's an interesting dynamic in missions. Sometimes there can be seasons in a work of God where your family is the team.
Yeah.
Right. And there isn't other people.
Right. Early on, our kids were smaller. And we did have the Driscoll. The Driscolls came and worked with us for like 2 years. After 2 years into it, they came and worked with us for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we really started the church. I was just kind of like getting used to it, just acclimatizing, being, on our own completely and learning the language, learning the culture, honoring other Mexican works, going and I started teaching Bible school and did prison ministry, but other things that I had Bible studies going, but we didn't start the church until the Driscolls came because they're such dynamic evangelists, and that's one point that's really, I think, important in church planning is you need people with evangelistic, not just the people that evangelize, but an evangelist, somebody that's very gifted in that area. And if you're by yourself, it's not that, but I've just learned that in church planning. But they were very key when we started the church. But when they came, we already had like 2 Bible studies going.
Okay.
And then we started a third in their house. And then, and that eventually, because of the area, there was nothing there as far as Christian churches at the time. So, and that group kind of grew pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 2 were okay. And we just joined up the 3 Bible study groups from different parts of the city. And we started the church with the Driscolls, Jack and Janice.
As your children got older, did you get them involved in the ministry? Were they like involved in? Is that normally what happens with teens when it's this the family you by way of force almost you have to use what you have so your kids become part of the worship team, AV, ushering. You just get involved.
Our kids were absolutely incredible missionaries and team members and servants, and they, from very early on. One time our kids, because God would provide different ways that we could get money because our support was so low. But one way was doing commercials, because it's cheaper to tape things in Mexico than the States. So a lot of companies, so they got in on a Gatorade commercial because they needed some American-looking guys.
Why not get Americans? Yes, okay.
Yeah, actually, a funny story about that. So those Gatorade commercials, they're playing basketball on a court. Okay. And they had this black kid playing basketball, but he wasn't American. He was like Cuban or something, and he couldn't play basketball.
Oh, my God.
And they tried to film it all day, and the kid couldn't do anything. So we had to stop production, and they brought in a black kid from L.A.
Wow.
With the swagger, the American thing, and the basketball. Now, of course, he could do a layup and all that. Yeah. But our kids were kind of like the white kids in the background, cheering.
With the surround crowd. But as long as they paid, right, Robert? They paid.
They paid.
They got $500 each. Our 3 kids,
which at the time was pretty a lot of money for them.
Wow.
They thought that was great. Yeah.
So Johnny bought the first drum set of the church, and he started playing drums. And then Stephanie, and she was 10 at the time, maybe 10. But she with her $500, she, where the church was, it was kind of very rustic, and she donated it to refurbish the Sunday school rooms.
Oh my goodness! And
everything like that. That's just the way our kids were. They were just amazing and.
Well, we encouraged them to tithe the money. They didn't the whole.
Oh, they gave the whole thing.
Well, so they put the money they earned, they put back in the mission. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, you bring your kids out on the mission field, and you don't know what's going to happen. You just want them to, at one point, to be safe, and then you want them at one point to somehow find God in that safety. But for them to go all the way in like that, you must be pretty proud as parents.
Yeah, and because of the situation with the finances and all that, I've asked them several times, like each one, I said, do you regret, the way y'all grew up and everything and the way we lived? And they said, Dad, never. Absolutely. We loved it. We absolutely loved it. And they did.
Because you hear the stories, Pastor Bruce, all the time about MKs, particularly MKs, that their childhood was deprived. They were held back. We didn't get Cheetos. There were no Milky Ways in our lunch boxes. We didn't have the American experience. So it's refreshing to hear that there's kids that grew up on the mission field and they loved their experience and they loved the meeting God. They loved doing it as a family and they loved being involved in the work of God. That's amazing to hear.
They loved the church. They loved building the church. They loved participating in everything.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, our young Stephanie, when she was maybe 5 or 6, we lived kind of far away from the church at the time. So I would get up early with John and Stephanie. She'd wake us up at like 6 a.m. Dad, let's go to church.
Oh,
And
wow.
we would go an hour and maybe 15, 20 minutes on public, set up the chairs, set up all the sound equipment. And our kids they were 100% into it.
Wow. What would you say? Because you guys have walked generationally. You came with kids, your kids grew up, and you're kind of walking through time with your kids through the maturation of the ministry. You're seeing them grow up in front of you and then eventually leave. What would you say was the challenges through all of that? Some challenges that you experienced as you did that while being missionaries and being parents at the same time?
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm looking back on how they grew up. They had very close-knit friends through the missionary school. And being parents, we had to be involved in the school constantly. And that was the role, one of the roles that I played, for the school. I'd be very involved in their lives, and it was a daily basis where we spent a lot of time together, socially. They didn't have like outlets like it's kind of like you'd send them together in a group if they were going to go out. So for me, I think the biggest challenge was to think of our kids going to college, and we had so much time to cover them. They were with us with the church, and so they didn't have a lot of time apart from us. And so like letting them go was hard, really hard.
Yeah.
And trusting, like, oh my gosh, they're gonna be okay. It's like they have to do everything on their own now. We're not going to be with them.
Plus, they weren't from America. They grew up in Mexico, and then they had to go through cultural shock going to the States.
Well, sometimes what missionary families have done is they allow their kids to come back a little bit later as teens. They have a little bit of an American experience before college, but you guys are unusual in that you didn't do that. You let them get raised all the way up in Mexico, and then basically as an adult go to college. So there's the culture shock of college, and there's the culture shock of America. That must have been interesting for them. Yes. That must have been extremely, dare I say, difficult.
For me personally, emotionally, yes, it was very hard. Each one, it didn't get better. It's like an experience to just have to let go and say that, trust the Lord. So yeah, I have to say that did happen. Yeah.
Pastor Bruce, how did you manage that as a father? I mean, you used to having those kids at the hip with you pretty much in the work of God. You get them in the morning, we're hand in hand in the ministry. And then you make the trek to America to kind of hand your kids over in one respect to an institution of higher learning and the life that goes with that. And then you're making the trek back down to Mexico.
Right. Yeah. There was some of those trips were very painful sometimes. Yeah. That little part, especially Johnny and Stephanie, I gave my kids sabbatical years, by the way. So Johnny took his and between high school and college and dedicated it to evangelizing. They started a fireball team of like 5 or 6 really gifted kids, and they evangelized over 500 public schools in Mexico that year.
Wow.
But his sister, and she was 1 year behind, she decided not to take her sabbatical. So they both went off together.
Oh.
And so our youngest daughter really depended. She was just so close with them, especially with her sister. And we thought, we were very fearful. We drove back in silence all the way to Mexico, thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to Melissa? But guess what? God provided, like always did. And this girl her age, a teenager, shows up in the church by herself. And she was just a fireball on fire for Christ. And she and our daughter just clicked. And they just reignited the entire youth group again.
Wow.
Which is something that recurs in youth groups. They come up and they have their cycles, right? And it was just amazing. This girl, they became best friends to this day. And and Melissa, our youngest, who was kind of shy and retiring, the youngest, just kind of flowered when brother and sister left. We were is the exact opposite of what we were fearful of. And we just found out once again how God is so faithful. It's just unbelievable.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes too, you guys as a couple, you've kind of walked through different chapters of your marriage through all of this. And in the middle of your marriage is this calling. The kids are there, but the call has been in the middle of it. How is that? Has there been any challenges in your marriage as you walk through these different chapters?
I'm just trying. I'm like in the beginning. What I think was a big challenge for me was, being a single parent. Having a single mother. And I was very independent when we first got married. I was very capable of doing everything on my own and had my own way of doing things, of course. And so I think going to Mexico was like it was such a different lifestyle because I couldn't speak Spanish. So Bruce even had to speak for me. I couldn't.
Wow.
I wanted to communicate with anybody. It had to be through him constantly. Our lifestyle, he worked when we were in America and I had my friends, I had a blitz bus to go soul winning on and, Bibles, all kinds of activities. Meanwhile, you go to, we're there in Mexico and I can't even speak to anyone. I'm in my home. I don't know. I can't walk around the corner or get lost, So I really had to depend on Bruce much, much more than I ever had before,
Wow.
So it really changed us in that way, the dynamics of our relationship.
Yeah, but as far as the empty nest syndrome, I mean, every parent goes through that, whether you're on the mission field or not.
Yeah.
The thing about us, we have our church, our family, our community, and, that's our family too. And
Yes.
We have
Wonderful.
really great disciples. Some of them are the kid who preached, the guy who preached on Sunday. Actually, this Sunday is, he grew up as a teenager in the church, and he's like one of my sons too.
Wow.
And that's kind of what the way the body of Christ works, right? It covers you from those kind of things.
Well, let me ask you this question: what keeps you on the field? I mean, you guys have all the reasons why a missionary would come home. You guys have gotten them. From the very beginning to the middle. I mean, the finances, the kids, there's all the reasons why. Age, I get older now. Okay, now we've done our part. We've done our issue. So all the reasons you could tick the boxes of why you would say we've done enough. Oh, it's been great. The service, give us the missions goal watch. It's all done. Retires. What keeps you in the field?
Well, part of it is just God hasn't spoken to us to leave, We're just, to me, it's the same today as it was 30 years ago.
Wow.
The call, and
yeah, we haven't gotten the Rema yet.
no Rema for going home. And, we don't know what else to do except what we're called to do. And never, don't look back, don't look left or right. Just keep your, eyes on the plow and the field and keep going. And God's still using us quite a bit. So
that's the second question I kind of have for you. It's like, okay, we're here. The challenge would the challenge would be, or the accusation would be, are we still effective? I know places that I've served, there's a season when God has said to me, if you're here one more day, you're out of my will. You've done all you can do in this location. It's time for you to move on, or it's time for someone else to step up. But you guys have not heard that, and you've walked through decades. I mean, you didn't just walk through a minute. The fact that you two are together and you're together in this for decades, over a quarter century, is amazing. And that the question would be effectiveness. Are we still effective? Because you can start to say, well, because we can't do what we did the way we did it, and we don't have what we had when we did it, maybe we can't do it.
Yeah. No, we haven't felt like that. I felt like we're just as effective as before. And of course, we have leaders, and if anything should happen to us, they could take over. I'm not fearful about that either. It's not like a question of not having people that could take over. It's more of a.
Let me rephrase. How do you keep freshness? I guess that's the best question. Because when you get somewhere for a long time, you start stacking years. You can get mechanical. You can get mechanical. You can get rhythmic, where it's just the thing. It's the 1-2, the 1-2. And how do you keep it? How do you stay fresh as a couple, as individually? How do you stay fresh?
That's your personal relationship with God, intimacy with Him. Walking, continuing to hear His voice. And staying responsive to that, of course.
Well, I think for me, freshness is, in a way, it's because I think that Bruce has given me a lot of freedom, to have, I'm not constantly in Mexico. I had to come back for my mom when she was dying. She was at the end of her life, and I had to, to be able to take care of her. And then having children, coming back for births and different things for the kids. And so for me, it's like, I think, I have to say that I'm thankful that I feel like I live in both worlds sometimes, because I have that freedom. But it's nice to know that Bruce is carrying the work and able to do that. So when I come back to people that do everything I used to do, as far as like the women's ministry and the children and a lot of the events that we have. And I just jump back in, but I always have somebody there that keeps the work going, and I'm able to, just be a part of it still, so yeah.
That's beautiful. I like the fact that you're still participating in it, but you don't have to necessarily drive it. I think all missions should ultimately lead that way anyway, whether it's a 1-year mission, a 5-year mission, a 10-year mission, a 30-year mission. If you're still driving it, then where's the discipleship at? Where is the generational leadership? But if I'm part of it, the ministry shouldn't be me. I'm part of the ministry. Then God has the ability and the liberty to take me out anytime, and something remains. There's fruit that remains. So it's great that that's happening. You guys are kind of a phenomena as older missionaries. A lot of folks right now would never consider missions because they would disqualify themselves for that reason alone. Ageism is a big idea when it comes to missions. Like, okay, maybe what I can do once in a while is pray for missions or even support missions. But there's your question. What about going? Maybe I'm older and I'm going. What would you say to someone who's older? Maybe they had a job, they had a career, maybe they retired, they were on Social Security. What would you say to an older missionary who's considering missions? What would you say?
Well, I would say, again, yes, you're Rima. You need to hear God and just do it. Now, I understand, a lot of Americans that are retired and have a pension and things like that actually move out of the States because it's cheaper to live in other places.
Yes.
And, but I don't think that's they might choose like missions. And I've seen people like that, in certain areas in Mexico and other places, I guess, but their motives seem to be mixed sometimes. They want the nice, easy lifestyle,
right?
And then do a little bit of church work and a little bit of that, maybe even get a little funding here and there for that. But you've got to have a call. That's my point. You got to have a call. You got to really hear God and do what He says. And with money, without money, if you have a pension or retirement fund, whatever. But be ready to die. Be ready to sacrifice your life is the point. Don't just do it because it's convenient or you have nothing else to do and it seems like a good idea at the time. You gotta take the rational mind out of it.
Okay.
And really get into the mind of Christ.
Robin, how about you?
I think I disagree with what he says, about that. I'm just thinking of, it can be a question for me would be for people to make sure that they are healthy, that they don't have issues that are going to cause them to maybe have to return. They need to make sure that they can,
Yeah,
have their things in order.
take care of your body for sure, because missions will take a toll on it too. And then, they're, especially Americans, they want the health care and all that. So, and then we've seen people come and have to go back for health reasons also.
Okay. I want to close with this because it's been a great program. It's been fun to hear how you guys got started. Think of a key moment in your mission in Mexico in all these years that you look back and the thing that kind of says to you, worth it. Worth it.
Wow.
There's a personal moment. It doesn't have to be necessarily magnanimous or this huge demonstrative display of Red Sea moment, but more like a Rhema moment, for lack of a better word, a Rhema moment where in the moment you knew you were in the right place, doing the right thing for the right reason, and God was with you. There could be many of those reasons, but just one that comes to mind.
I think, when you see a soul being saved in any situation, like if it's on outreach or an event that you might have ladies standing up maybe in a women's breakfast where, you see them accepting the Lord, it's like every time it's so encouraging to know that that's where you want to be. You want to be where you can see that happening, and that your life has that purpose always, to know that we have this treasure and it's to be given out. And, I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing, when we're there.
And I would say, we have a great church there. We have a building, maybe 2,000 at least square feet, which we own. We don't owe anything on it. And, great disciples and things like that. But the funny thing for me is like that I would say worth it is watching my kids and my grandkids, like, my son in Minnesota, who's really serving God, him and his wife, they're song leaders, they preach, they're leaders in the church, they disciple. People they disciple are now pastors and starting their own churches in Minnesota. Wow. And our other kids also just knowing that, God was faithful with our kids and our grandkids. My granddaughter here a year ago watched the Jesus Revolution movie and asked her dad that she wanted to get baptized. And he said, okay, I'll tell the pastor. And she said, no, I want grandpa to baptize me.
Oh my goodness.
And so a year ago, we baptized her here up here in the Boston area, right where her dad was baptized.
Oh.
And she loves God. I turned around yesterday in church and during the worship, and she was singing. She has her boyfriend. She led him to the Lord. Now he goes to church. And that to me is worth it. Like, wow. God will be faithful to you and your family if you're faithful to him.
Wow. Amen. Beautiful. That's a wonderful story. I love that. God, the faithfulness of God through the decades in your family, in your marriage, in your field, that just proves the consistency of God's favor for us, God's love for us, God's grace for us. Thank you so much for joining us on Missions Monday. Thank you for encouraging us. We appreciate that so much. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Missions Monday. Thanks, Pastor.
God bless.
Okay.